Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Law Institute's first session of Summer School 2025. We're so excited to see some of you here in person and so many of you online. If you don't know me, I'm Madison Calhoun. I'm the Senior Manager of Educational Programs here at the Environmental Law Institute. And if this is your first summer school, we welcome you. Summer School offers an introduction to the legal and policy foundations of environmental protection in the United States. It's a free public seminar series that we offer every single year here at ELI. And this year is going to be offered every single week throughout the months of June and July. We will be alternating between having hybrid sessions each year or each week that are based in our office in DC, and then every other week we'll have webinars. So for example, next week's webinar, which will be our first substantive program on NEPA and the Endangered Species Act, will be webinar only, but then in 2 weeks we'll be back in here again for the Clean Air Act session. So my colleague Sarah will drop everything in the chat if you are following along online. So we highly encourage you to sign up for all of the other sessions of summer school. And all sessions will also be recorded and uploaded to ELI's YouTube page and website for you to view later. So if you're unable to miss any, or if you're unable to make any sessions, you can definitely check them out. And on the screen behind me, you can see which ones will be hybrid, which ones will be virtual, and all of that great information. Just a few quick logistics before we get started today. We will be saving time at the end of the program for audience questions. Our in-person audience, if you could just save your questions until the very end, we'll get to you then. But our online audience, if you could just submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar, as soon as you think of them, we'll be able to keep track of them online. So no need to wait until the end if you are joining us online. And should the in-person audience have any questions, feel free to approach my colleague Sarah at the back there, and we'll be happy to help you out. But thank you so much for joining us, and we are so excited. So to kick us off today, we are going to kind of just go down the line of all of my wonderful speakers here. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're very grateful for their time. And I'm going to just ask one question to kick it off and give everyone about 5 to 10 minutes to answer that before we jump into more of a roundtable discussion. So my first question is, could you please introduce yourself and tell our audience about your career journey so far? How did you end up in the field of environmental law, and what environmental positions have you held over the years? And starting off, we're going to have Jane Luxton, who's the managing partner at Brisbois.
Thank you, Madison. I'm actually the managing partner of the DC office of Brisbois. I have yet to take over the entire firm. I would answer your question first by saying my path to becoming an environmental lawyer and where I am today was roundabout. I started as an antitrust lawyer out of law school, began at the Federal Trade Commission, Justice Department Antitrust Division, then went to a private firm. After a time, had my first child, wanted to scale down the hours I was spending being a lawyer. And so I went to a company where I thought I would have more moderate hours and a better work-life balance. And that was proven to be a mistake. So my next move was to a very small firm as a part-time associate, which I then stayed for a while and had my second child and became a partner while they still allowed me to work part-time, which I was forever grateful for and would have stayed there forever. However, that firm, some of the partners who created it were aging out. So it was time to move on. And at that point, my parents started asking if I had problems holding a job. But I went to a slightly larger firm. We developed conflicts with a major client in the firm, then started our own. So we had a 6-person firm with all our names in it. That was a good platform for a while, but it proved hard to expand my practice from there. So I went to a larger firm, King & Spalding, loved it, stayed there for a while, but had the urge to move on. So I was offered the opportunity to become general counsel of NOAA, which National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Loved that position. It came to an end, and then went to a firm where I ironically clerked as the summer associate many years earlier, and was lured away from there by an offer to be part of a dream team representing the state of Florida in the BP oil spill natural resource damage litigation. Went to that firm, and then serendipity arrived again, and I moved over to Brisbois, where we were creating a new DC office for that firm, which is the 6th or 7th largest in the country, but not as known in Washington, DC. It's LA based. So that is my roundabout story. Along the way, I became an environmental lawyer at the firm where I worked part-time. I was the associate at the firm, but it turned out most of the needs for an associate were for someone in environmental law. The firm represented several trade associations who had a broad-based set of problems. And so unlike many environmental lawyers, particularly those who work at EPA, become experts under a particular statute, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, various others, my clients had problems all over the place. So I learned something about each of the statutes, which is a different kind of expertise, and it requires true experts if you get stuck with a major problem in a particular area. But that is pretty much what I've done since, although because of a whole series of additional circumstances that required me to be fleet-footed and pivot, I now would probably describe myself more as an administrative lawyer who has involvement in a variety of subject matter areas, but I still have clients who have major environmental problems and spend a great deal of my time in those areas.
Oh, thank you so much, Jane. Now we'll go off to our second speaker, who is William Pierre-Matai, who is the Managing Director of the Environmental Law Program at the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law. So I'll hand things over to you.
And thank you for having me here. It's quite an honor to be amongst this panel. Greatly appreciate it. I took a very roundabout route as well. I didn't go to law school right out of college. I like to call my 20s the lost decade before I figured out that working as a paralegal in a law firm that I could be a lawyer definitely and make a lot more money doing it. So I ended up going to the University of Maryland Law School, concentrating in environmental law, but developing a real interest in litigation while in law school. And decided, because I had a growing family at the time, 2 little ones and 2 large student loans, that I should get into litigation, go work for a law firm. And so I progressively worked at a small law firm, a mid-sized law firm, and then ended up my last 6+ years of practice at Venable, very large law firm. I liked the practice all along the way. It was really interesting starting as a litigator right out of law school. The small law firm was perfect. I got a lot of small matters to actually get into court. I became, within 18 months, our law firm's leading expert on defective toilet seat cases. And, you know, not to brag too much, but I was 3-0 in those cases. I'm just saying. And, you know, from there, though, I really wanted to get in. They weren't doing any environmental matters, so I moved to a mid-sized firm doing toxic torts. And then through that and doing work with lots of different defense counsel, Venable said, hey, why don't you come do this kind of work with us? And I enjoyed all 3 of those experiences. But when it came time to become partner at big law firm, or at least is on that track, I just realized this isn't me. I'm not a corporate attorney. I mean, for 10 years, I sort of played one. It was, in some sense, a role to play. And at that point, really started reflecting on, well, if I'm not going to do this, what should I do? And was in the process of figuring out when, because I was on our environmental law program alumni listserv, this opportunity that I'm in now fell into my inbox, and I just knew immediately. I was like, that's what I'm supposed to do. And so for the last 15 years, I've been the managing director of the environmental law program, which requires me to do a whole lot of different things. Everything from developing the curriculum, recruiting adjuncts, to running our externship program, to working as an attorney in our clinic. We do a lot of environmental justice matters, Clean Water Act matters, and the like. And, you know, I now consider my most important role, frankly, giving, you know, career advice and counseling students one-on-one, and trying to get them to focus on the most important thing in law school, which is, why are you there and what do you want to do when you get out? Which is hard to do, especially in a field like environmental law that's so very broad. But we'll talk about that in a moment.
Thank you so much for that. Then our third speaker today is Christine Perry, who is a staff attorney here at ELI. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. Thanks, Madison and Sarah. I think I had the shortest commute just down the hallway to join, but I'm really happy to be here. So I also had a kind of a roundabout way of finding environmental law that I took a few years off after undergraduate, lived in Spain, did some volunteer work, and I got jury duty. And I thought about going to law school, and I was on the jury, and I thought that I could do this. I could be a lawyer. I don't want to be a prosecutor, but I could be a lawyer. And so I thought, I speak Spanish. I'd like to use that. So I wanted to do immigration law, work with more humanitarian type visas. That's what I was doing in law school. But I had had a background in human rights and gender issues from my undergraduate studies. And so my third year of law school, all my friends are getting offers. They're going to big firms. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? That if you're in law school, if you're in your third year, that after the summer, a lot of your friends come back and they know what they're doing after graduation and they are set, and you're a little jealous. You might know that it maybe isn't for you, but it would be nice to have that security blanket of knowing what you're going to be doing. But my law school at the time had a fellowship for international public service law. And so I thought that's me to a T. I want to do that. So I had to apply to different host organizations, have them accept me, and then apply for the funding. I had an offer to do more general human rights issues and immigration on the Italian Riviera, which sounded nice. I had lived in southern Spain, so I thought maybe something different. I had an offer to work somewhere on international democracy issues in Sweden. Well, that would be nice. And then I had an offer from Amnesty International in London. And I had worked with Amnesty as a college student in my local chapter. And I thought that's it. So I moved to London after law school, worked with Amnesty, really on a lot of different issues, on detention, freedom of expression and association and assembly, kind of the bread and butter issues when you think of international human rights law. But I got really interested in disability rights, that I wanted to see more representation in our work. So I shifted to that while incorporating the other issues, incorporating gender issues. And at that time, we started looking more at human rights and climate change. We had hired a researcher on that. My boss at the time was very interested in the connection between human rights and the environment. And we had hired a new secretary general who was also coming from the environmental space. So, wheels kind of turning, like I should get some experience in environmental law. My time at Amnesty came to an end, that I had stayed on a bit longer than my intended year, that I was working remotely. I really wanted to work in an office setting again. So I looked for, really anything that could bridge the two interests of environmental law and human rights. I saw a posting at ELI looking for an attorney that spoke Spanish, that had worked on international issues for a project in Colombia. And I thought, I can do that for a little bit. Let's get some experience and then see what's what. I'd like to be back in an office setting. My first day was March 16th, 2020. So I did not have an office setting for several years. But I really got exposed to so many environmental issues from an international perspective. So that's how I was introduced to international environmental law, but always retained my ties to human rights law and really bridging the intersection in my projects. But we will talk more about that during this session.
Thank you so much, Christine. We'll now go to our next speaker, Meredith Hankins, who is the Federal Climate Legal Director at the Natural Resources Defense Council, otherwise known as NRDC.
Thanks so much. So I'm Meredith, she, they pronouns. I actually have done some form of environmental law my whole career, even if it wasn't necessarily called that. I grew up about 2 hours from here in a tiny little town in West Virginia, and just grew up being aware of coal mining and pollution, and just knew that I wanted to do something about it. And I really enjoyed math and science as a kid, and someone told me I should be an engineer, and I said, great, sounds good. I also wanted to get out of West Virginia, so I went as far away as I could and got my chemical engineering degree in Los Angeles at USC. And really fell in love there with kind of the idea of air pollution control and environmental regulation. And so Right after undergrad, I worked for the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the local regulatory body that oversees air quality in the Los Angeles basin, which folks may know is not great. Better than it was 50 years ago, but still, you know, they've got some challenges in air quality there. So there, my job was reviewing Clean Air Act permits that were submitted by local refineries when they wanted to upgrade their equipment or change their operations. My job was to check their numbers, make sure they had the right air pollution controls, complied with all the rules, and then issue them a permit. About 2 years in, I realized we were getting sued a lot by nonprofits that were actually driving progress forward and making us commit to enforce the rules better and stronger rules. And I was like, wait a minute, that actually seems pretty cool. Maybe I want to do that. But no one in my family had gone to law school. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't really know how to get started. So I took a couple more years, I saved money, and then I went to law school. And I kind of always knew that I wanted to end up at a nonprofit doing Clean Air Act law. It took me a little while to get to NRDC, but the through line has always been the Clean Air Act. So I did a clerkship right after law school for the Supreme Court of Hawaii, which I'm happy to talk about. I then did a fellowship at UCLA Law's Emmett Institute for Climate Change. So I was there for 2 years. From there, I went to the California Attorney General's office, doing a lot of really cool DC Circuit Clean Air Act litigation during the first Trump administration, and then realized maybe full-time litigation wasn't quite for me. I did want to take vacation sometimes, which is a little tricky when you're representing the people of the state of California. And I wanted to move back east to be closer to my family where I grew up. So I went to NYU's Institute for Policy Integrity, where I led their Clean Air Act transportation work. And then an opening showed up at NRDC to join their federal legal team. And I found out all they did was Clean Air Act. And I was like, yes, finally. So I've been at NRDC now for 2 years, and I run our sort of EPA federal climate defense. So a range of litigation, administrative advocacy, policy work, kind of a whole spectrum of environmental work that is very fun.
Okay, I'm Steve Neugeboren. I was at the Environmental Protection Agency in the Office of General Counsel in Washington for 38 years. And retired actually last year. Spent a couple months on the golf course and decided retirement wasn't really my thing. And so I'm looking for my next opportunity, and it's a good place. I'm a consumer as well as a conveyor of information here, which is exciting. And since I don't really have the story like these folks about how I got to the federal service, but what I see the theme here is that there was a lot of sort of following the heart here and where the route that they took. However, you know, many steps were involved. And I think the reason I stayed at the agency for 38 years was my heart was fully met throughout. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about why and, you know, what it's like to be a government attorney, particularly a counseling attorney. And first, just what, you know, you do when you arrive there. Government counsel is, you know, you're thrown in at the deep end and you're involved in interdisciplinary teams. Working on some of the most interesting issues. I worked on lead in drinking water at the beginning. I worked on regulations to protect the Great Lakes. And the attorneys in my organization were truly embedded in the policymaking process. And there's a lot of people around the table, but there's only one lawyer usually. And so there was an old commercial for a brokerage firm called E.F. Hutton. And they used to say, it was a great commercial because it said, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. So when you're a government counseling attorney, people listen. They want their laws to survive judicial review. They want them to be durable. And what that involves is just a suite of fast, you know, really challenging roles and skill sets. It's a lot of collaborative problem solving. If you're averse to consensus building and meetings and that sort of stuff, might not be the place for you. But I loved it because it was so hand in glove, got a lot of exposure to the science, the economics, and the job of the attorney in a counseling function in the government is really to help put all that information into, you know, clear language for reviewing courts, which benefits the public and the regulated community, obviously, as well. And that takes a lot of skill and a lot of development of relationships with clients, which again was one of the things that I loved about being a government attorney. The last half of my career, and this would be down the road for anybody, I was a senior executive and I ran an office. By the way, I forgot to mention, I spent all 38 years in the water law office in the general counsel's office. So I worked on water issues, but I consider myself more also a generalist, worked on NEPA, ESA, and there's a lot of cross-cutting stuff that we dealt with as well. Then I became a senior executive and I was running the office of about 20 attorneys, got the whole big picture of the statutory schemes and programs. And importantly, and the most challenging part and the most gratifying part for me was reporting directly to the sort of presidential appointee level. And that exposed me to what I think is a really important dimension of government counseling, but it's not special to that. I mean, it's true in any, I think, of these roles of there's a science of being an attorney, and then there's the art. And the science is the stuff that everyone learns in law school. It's how you do legal research. It's how you do legal writing and advocacy. But the art, a lot of it's just client relations, which again, everyone here does. And then in a governmental capacity, it's learning how, in particular, the question I get on these panels most frequently is, well, what about when there's changes, administration and policies shift? And what if you don't like the policies of a new administration? That's a personal decision, everyone has to make for themselves. What I will say is that I've served 5 presidents and in 9 administrations. And the role of the counseling attorney in a government agency never changes, regardless of who's in charge. Our role is to advise decision makers and clients about the legal dimension of their decisions. And often the most important part is choosing among options for what to put in the regulation. And the role of these, I often use the term, we're there to call balls and strikes. And we're there to do with, the highest quality legal use of the science skills, the legal analyses and research and writing. But the art part is learning to communicate with people that change, where they come in and out every 4 years. And the most important element of that is building trust with the new team, whoever they are. And that's an art. And the art, it's not unique again, I think, to government service. But and building that trust involves proving your mettle, doing the science really, really well. It's hard work to do that. The first year of administration is the most important because that's where you're building those relationships and building the confidence and trust, being transparent, understanding they're coming in with a different mindset. Some people, I don't necessarily, they're coming in with what every administration comes in with to varying degrees is they want to take a fresh look. They want to understand what's happened before and then where they want to land. And so the most important thing when they want to take a fresh look is showing your work. Like remember the old math classes, show the work. That's what you need to do. And you build the relationships, and it's challenging and very, very gratifying. There's not been any time in my 38 years when I didn't feel that we succeeded in building that trust and confidence. Because at the end of the day, the counseling attorney's role is to make sure that decision makers, whoever they are making informed ones. And they are informed by the legal parameters and the legal ramifications. And when I did that, which I felt like and then when I was a manager, my team did, I had done my job. And so for me, it was a good fit between the collaborative problem solving, the importance of the role, the pivotal role of the counseling attorney in decisions of momentous importance, environmentally, economically, and otherwise. So that's kind of why I stayed all those years. I can't say, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Thank you all so much for sharing your career stories with us. I now have quite a few questions. We'll get through as many as we can, just kind of digging deeper into what a career in environmental law looks like and getting more information for our audience. So my first question is, environmental law is complicated and can be quite different from what folks might initially expect. So in your opinion, what is environmental law and what does being an environmental lawyer mean to you? We can go in any order, so just feel free to jump in.
Start, I guess. To me, environmental law is about problem solving. And the problem is the law says certain things are required. Those who are required to obey that law have to find feasible ways to do it. So sometimes the problem is, how can you make that happen? And a lot of what Steve said really comes into play here. Building trust. Often environmental law can be very polarized. People approach it with a black-white attitude. Somebody is all right and the other side is all wrong, and both sides tend to feel that way. So one of the most important roles of an environmental lawyer is managing your client's expectations, explaining to them what is possible, what is required, and trying to encourage them to not just be mad about it, but to think of ways to accomplish the goals that are required by the law in a way that doesn't just bankrupt the company or is in some way constructive. And so that's sort of my very pragmatic answer to that question.
Just building on that, or perhaps an analogy you want to use. Environmental law really is law that's trying to mediate our behavior, human being behavior, and typically they're regulated entities such as corporations, right? And their interaction with the environment, keeping in mind that we want to have a healthy environment to have healthy people, right? And it's done in such a variety of ways, and that those ways have exploded over the last decade or two, right? So now land use is becoming very much an environmental law focused endeavor, if you will, right? Energy law is, you know, the environmental issues involving energy now are sort of overwhelming a lot of the other issues that used to be part of energy law. Water, air, toxic disposals, right? Chemical regulations are becoming, you know, it's becoming apparent that it's still problematic in this country, PFAS being a great example. So with the increasing number of people with a degrading environment, right, environmental issues are going to continue to come to the fore in a variety of things. Climate change being, I'd say, the biggest thing that now, you know, I mean, it affects transportation, infrastructure development, right? Energy transmission, you name it, in, you know, climate change is involved in some way, shape, or form, agricultural practices. So it's a really big, sprawling field that's, I think, difficult for folks who perhaps many of you are saying, well, geez, where's my place in all of this? And one thing I like to do is take one step back and say, well, think about what, not just the topic you're interested in, but what kind of a lawyer you want to be, right? A litigator, transactional lawyer, government regulatory lawyer. That might be a better way to look at environmental law through the lens of the role you want to play, and then start thinking about, well, what areas of environmental law could I practice in given my interests?
So I'm going to approach that part of the question thinking about what being an environmental attorney means to me, that I really do think of myself as a human rights attorney that works in environmental law. And I think my role is slightly different from others on the panel, that at ELI, we don't litigate and we don't advocate. That might not be what you kind of square with what an attorney does, but that we do a lot of consensus building, bridging gaps, bringing people together, but we also do a lot of training, a lot of information sharing. So for me, my, you know, being an environmental attorney might be going to Honduras and holding a verification workshop with, you know, government agencies from both Honduras and Guatemala on their environmental crimes and how the two countries maybe can bridge, you know, their border, because as we know, environmental crimes are transboundary, that an air issue in Guatemala is going to be most likely an air issue in Honduras. It also is working with judges in Columbia on how does a deforestation case look like? What are the public participation issues? What are the evidence issues? What are the judicial remedies that they might have? But all of this is to say, I don't come in with, this is the answer, this is exactly what you need to do, but offer a comparative approach of, this is what Colombian law says, this is what the experts who I'm working with in Colombia says the law says, because I'm not a Colombian lawyer. This is what a Chilean judge might do. This is what a US judge might do. This is what a Swedish judge has done, and really giving people options and helping them think creatively. So again, like, I'm not going to court, I'm not writing briefs, but I am, using that legal brain and a comparative approach. So for me, that's what being an environmental lawyer is.
I've always thought of environmental law through the lens of public interest and public service. I grew up. Sorry, I'll repeat if that didn't go through. I've always viewed environmental law through the lens of public interest and public service. As I mentioned, I grew up in West Virginia, kind of seeing firsthand what mountaintop mining removal looks like and does to the environment, and also the impact it had on people and communities. And in undergrad and in my time at South Coast, really learning what environmental justice and environmental racism meant and what it looked like in practice has just really informed my idea of why I am an environmental lawyer, and thinking about the ways in which my work can help people. And to me, that's just always been the ultimate goal of my practice. It's just thinking about, at NRDC, my clients are our members, so folks who live across the United States who deal with pollution and facilities in their neighborhoods, and just thinking about how my work contributes to their lives has always been the motivating factor for environmental law for me.
I might answer that question with sort of going to an antecedent question: why environmental law? And like, if you looked at the Clean Water Act, the sort of a catalyzing event was the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. And we all know the public health and environmental rationales for it. People drink water, people breathe air. And it's really important that it be safe. An economist, the why is internalizing externalities. Who is going to pay for the cost of the pollution? So, and then when you get to the what, it's obviously the legal framework for a vast number of activities. I forget how it's been measured, but what the actual metric was, but I believe that EPA reaches more people, more companies, more than any other federal agency. And these regimes are quite complex, and I think environmental law from a governmental perspective very much, is, like Jane said, a problem-solving exercise, not on the compliance side, but on the policy side. And that comes down to balancing, a lot of balancing. And one of the kind of things people say in the government is, well, if we were sued by environmental groups and industry, we did the right thing. And that's very frustrating, I think, to so the stakeholders all around. And I think it's a vast oversimplification, because really what the goal is to do something that's well-grounded, defensible, technically, scientifically, and legally. Maybe I'll just leave it at that. It's a very robust framework, and it's been tested. It's been around for a long time, right? These are statutes that haven't been, Clean Water Act, they haven't been amended in a long time. So a lot of it is applying old statutory frameworks to problems as they evolve and emerge, PFAS being the most obvious example. And then the challenges associated with, by the compliance folks. I mean, the private sector that needs to adapt and kind of figure out how to comply with these complex regulatory regimes. And as Jane said, that's its own, problem-solving exercise. So it's good we have it. It's essential that we have it. And I'll end with this. The most there could always be, and when I was ever in the room with the environmentalists and industry for an extended period of time, like settling cases. You know, I had one case in the Second Circuit where the home builders and NRDC, I think it was NRC, came to consensus on stormwater control from industrial sites. There's a lot of common ground that could be out there, more than we find if the time is taken to do that. And I wish it happened more.
So as you can all see from our wonderful speakers and their backgrounds, environmental law is a very diverse field. It intersects with so many different career paths. How do you all recommend that folks find an area that is a good fit for them who are just getting started in environmental law?
Well, I'll jump in since I'm sort of default first speaker here, but I think you've heard a really good set of stories about essentially trial and error. Internships, mentoring, any kind of fellowship, and sometimes you just take a shot. One of the things I have learned over a career where I've jumped around a lot is it's not always going to work. Not every one of these jobs or experiences is going to be a success. And somehow resilience has to be part or become part of your character. And sometimes you have to take a chance. And like I said, it didn't work out. And you learn from that. But the people on this panel have given a great set of examples of how they've gone through different career opportunities, been open to the possibilities, taken chances, and found the right fit. And it took some time. So I guess don't be too impatient. Be willing to make thoughtful, risk-taking choices, and always try and find a door that you leave open if the one that you tried slams closed.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of picking up where I left off. Number one, I think by hearing all these stories, I hope you get the idea. Other than Steve, I think is the outlier. I was at someplace for 38 years. Most lawyers, you're talking 3, 4, 5, 6 different jobs during their career. And so number one, embrace that, right? That's not exactly a bad thing. Second is, I think, picking up where I left off, which is, subject matter is important. It can certainly help drive you sort of, this is something I'm interested in reading and learning more about. But more important than that, right, is developing the skills you're going to need for the career you want. And there you have to think much more in terms of, do I want to be a litigator? Do I want to be a transactional attorney? Right? Do I want to be a government regulatory attorney? Each of those 3 major paths, I call them, require a whole different skill set, right? And so think of law school, not so much as, well, I'm here to learn the law. Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's kind of the easy part, right? I think the harder thing to really develop are interests that you're going to want to spend 50 plus hours a week developing. Because the learning curve is very steep when you get out of law school. So you're going to have to sort of dedicate yourself. Well, probably should be doing something that you actually enjoy doing or are very interested in doing. So I'd say sort of listen to your gut as far as, and take a lot of different kinds of classes, not just environmental law, to really see what is it that I'm really interested in doing. Do I like the idea of being a litigator? And this is where I spend a lot of time with students and alums talking through with them, right? What is it that you really like to do? Well, let's work on that and let's build off of that. What other opportunities are out there given what you really are interested in, right? And how can you get to where you want to be sort of 5 years into your career, and it might take several steps along the way, right? To be a transactional lawyer in the environmental law space, say doing, renewable energy, which is incredibly complex, you might need to start at sort of a much more basic real estate development, transactional practice, develop those skills, then move on. So, it is, I would call it a process and process that you have to invest a lot of time and thought. And I tell folks, spend an hour a week at least just staring out the window saying, what would I really like to do with my life? I think that's some of the best time you could possibly spend in figuring out where do you belong in environmental law. And of course, talking to a lot of people in the field. I think that is incredibly helpful as well.
I think that is great advice. So to find what I would say, if you're looking for what area of environmental law is for you, I'd encourage you to think creatively. Creatively, I don't know why that word is just really hard for me today.
It's just so important.
Yeah, it is. I guess it's it's a hard week, I guess. I would like think outside the box that sometimes when you hear about environmental issues, you kind of hear about the big ones, but there are so many other issues you can work on. Are you really interested in animals and wildlife protection? That may be a path for you. That, as you heard me said, that I worked in immigration, then I did a lot on the rights of persons with disabilities. How does that fit into environmental law? I wrote a piece on, environmental issues, climate change, environmental migration, and the rights of persons with disabilities within that context. What rights are being violated when persons with disabilities migrate due to climate change or other environmental factors? If you're really interested in gender issues, how are women being represented in environmental processes and decision making? That there are so many opportunities in environmental law to bridge, maybe non-environmental interests with environmental interests. That my colleagues at ELI work on, honestly, everything under the sun, that they do some really cool, impressive work that you might not necessarily think, oh yeah, that's environmental law. So I think, if you're interested in the environment, think about what are those issues, that it might not be, oh, I want to do, clean air, I want to do clean water, which are also really interesting issues, but maybe you have something else you want to bring in. And I would challenge you not to think of, okay, that's not environmental, I can't bring it into what I want to do.
I think I'm going to go against the grain a little bit and say, actually, what might be more important than finding the area of law you want is where you want to work. At the end of the day, these are jobs. And when you work on something you're really passionate about, it's sometimes the worst because it's really hard to close your laptop and walk away when you're in a career where you're saving people's lives and preventing climate change. Like, how do you walk away from that? And so sometimes your dream job might not actually be the dream job. So just sort of think about where you want to work as much as the area of law. So like, I've worked on the Clean Air Act my whole career, but I've jumped around a lot because I was looking for a work environment that was supportive and that allowed me to do the work I wanted to do without being overwhelmed. Since law school, I've changed jobs almost like every 2 or 3 years, because that was sort of the cap at which, do I like the people I work with? Is this the work I want to keep doing? Am I supported here? Is there room for growth? I just passed the 2-year mark at NRDC. No plans to leave. I was just promoted. I'm the chair of our queer employee resource group. Finding the work environment that you want to work in is almost as important, if not more important, than the area of the law.
I think that's a really good point. And in my area, that's why when I didn't add it, didn't include it, but the collegiality, the support, it's your spending most of your life there. So I think that's a critical point. I want to echo and expand a bit. Do you go by Bill or William?
Bill.
Bill. Okay. What Bill said about talking to people, and it hadn't really occurred to me, and I don't really have a good sense of the audience either here or out there where there's 400 people signed up, and there would seem to be an affiliation for almost everybody, like a company or a state. So I'm only assuming that these aren't folks necessarily in law school. So I don't know where, maybe they're, beginning their careers and thinking about their trajectory, and that's why they're signed in. But the one thing that's maybe the single most important thing to me, if you're wherever you are, is like Bill said, talking to people. When you're mid-career, you have a network. I'm reaching out to everybody I know as I think about what I want to do next. That's the single most important thing, informational interviews. Because with every conversation, you learn something. And I think that's true. I don't know if people do that in the third year. Certainly we weren't when I was in school, but your professors have connections, people, and say, hey, can you, the email that says, hey, I'm connecting Joe and Sue for conversation, Joe. And then they're always willing to spend a little bit of time with you. And even if not, reaching out to people, I think particularly if you're a student, people are always willing, interested in helping out folks that are just starting out. So immensely important in your job search, and those kinds of connections and network that you build, at the end of the day, can be the most important thing to actually landing something that you want.
Next question, I'm going to ask kind of a clarifying question. I think people see lawyers on TV and they think litigation. But as you probably might have picked up on from some of the answers so far, environmental law also often involves policy work. So how does policy work differ from traditional legal work? And are there any advantages or disadvantages to a career that is focused on environmental policy?
Well, I'll be contrarian and say I don't think it differs. I think it's just part of legal work. So, for example, I said managing clients and solving problems is one of the ways I look at environmental law. So suppose a new regulation comes down and clients say, we can't comply with that. It'll bankrupt the company. What do? Right? They ask me for advice. How do we solve this problem? Well, you can go talk to the regulators and say, this isn't feasible. Here's a whole technical study explaining why it won't work this way. Ideally, I could get my clients to the point of saying, but here's another way it would work, or that kind of thing. You can put your comments in and they disregard it. And now you are in court. You're challenging that final regulation. You're now an appellate lawyer. You're challenging it in the Court of Appeals. Maybe you challenge it at the Supreme Court. Another way you could try to solve this problem is you go to the Hill and you say, Mr. Congressman, who represent this, or Ms. Congressman, you represent this company and this entire collection of people who can't comply with this regulation. Can you pass some legislation, or can you hold a hearing, or can you write a letter to the regulators and say, my constituents are saying this can't be worked? And then they get involved. There's a relatively obscure regulatory agency called the Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy, which represents small businesses. If you have clients who are small businesses, they can say, oh my God, this may be okay for big companies, but not for little ones. We need to have a SBREFA panel, a particular specialized law that applies only to EPA, the CFPB, and OSHA, because those have regulations that have been found to disproportionately affect small businesses. So you can, through that process, try to affect change. So I think this is all part of environmental law. And I have seen people who started out as legislative assistants for congressmen. They go to law firms, they go to consulting groups, people move back and forth, particularly in Washington. Revolving door is not necessarily a bad thing. They go in and out of government. I'm an example. I've been a senior trial attorney at the Justice Department, special assistant U.S. attorney. Those skill sets have come in handy in all of the other things that I've done. But environmental law is all of this. And in addition, I'm only talking really about a Washington, D.C. practice that involves regulatory matters primarily. But I have partners in our Atlanta office and California, and they are constantly dealing with what Steve mentioned, renewable energy projects, which are, I would think of this as a real estate type problem. But it's due diligence, how do we comply with local zoning, which is an environmental law, all of these kinds of things. So I view it as really interrelated and a holistic type of areas in which you practice, even if you think of yourself as one type of environmental lawyer. And I think Steve mentioned it too. The lawyers were involved in the policy issues, not just sitting in their back offices writing regulations that my clients hate.
I in looking at this, I mean, generally when you think about environmental policy, you're not necessarily doing it on behalf of a client, right? That the practice of environmental law, being an environmental lawyer, usually involves being involved in a regulatory process, getting a permit, challenging a rule, so forth and so on. In litigation, trying to achieve an outcome, a specific outcome for a client, right? In transactions, getting the deal done so that the solar array can be built, right? So I set up those three as the main three, is at least when you're first coming out of law school, I encourage students to pursue, even if they think they want to end up in policy, to pursue one of those three, to build those skills, actually get involved in the application of those laws. So that when you move into more of a policy-oriented position, which is problem solving sort of on a large scale as opposed to an individual client scale, you're going to have that much more gravitas, right? Because you've actually experienced it, worked with it, and now you're an expert in it. So let me tell you how the way this should work as a policy matter. And that is a very fluid move. I mean, I went from representing clients to now I do what I generally think of as policy work, but also doing work with clients as well. The reverse isn't true. So getting into policy, you're often, if you come to ELI, and spend several years here, you go to issue advocacy in another nonprofit, say, or go to a think tank. I mean, you name the kind of policy-oriented position, and it's very difficult to get out of that and into representing clients because you haven't built those skills necessarily to represent a client in a matter or in a transaction or what have you. So I think it is different in that the scope of your work differs dramatically, and you're not doing it for a specific, say, purpose, but rather than a more generalized, here's the way the law should work. And it's not, and I'm advocating for change, right? As opposed to a more specified type of work. So I think there is a difference, but as Jane mentioned, there is a lot of overlap. And I think that's true. The sort of the bigger the case you're working on, I'd say the more the overlap exists, shall we say.
I would agree with that, that if you are in law school, you're thinking about law school, you think you might want to litigate, that's something you should try earlier rather than later. It's much easier to go from litigation to policy work than go policy to litigation. That's a really big challenge and not very common. That when I was in law school, that I did do more direct representation. Obviously I wasn't a lawyer, but your third year, depending on where you go to law school, that you might have a clinic where you can work with a supervising attorney and you do represent the clients, but you have that supervisor. So I did juvenile delinquency and immigration cases. In the summer, I worked with survivors of various violent crimes, applying for specific visas. So I did get that one-on-one interaction with clients. I think that that's really good skill to build, working with people, working with diverse clients, that you're not always going to be representing a major corporation. You're not always going to be representing, the government, that you are going to be working with so many different people from so many walks of life. And that's really going to inform the work you do. So I think getting that experience will, one, improve your law practice, but also help you as a person. That, even though I work in policy, that the issues I work on very much impact real people, that the communities facing the biggest environmental harms are generally overburdened with these and sometimes lack the resources to address these harms. So really that's kind of at the heart of what I do. And from my past experience working with clients that were often pushed out of the decision-making process, I did have that one-on-one interaction that I can bring into my policy work, even if it's a different issue, and kind of center the people in my work, even though I might not be directly representing anyone anymore.
I have anything to add.
I don't have much to add because I think this all made total sense to me, and I don't have a window into the policy kind of sector, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's true what Jane said. Oh, I will add this as maybe just as an internal agency matter is if you wanted to be in a federal agency, or at least in EPA, attorneys do move to policy positions from attorney positions. That's definitely a career path that some choose. Not have for my office when I was running it, so I guess they just really liked it there. Or also they just got their policy appetite whetted, like because we were so kind of involved in the policymaking process.
Can I just add one thing that came to me from some of these good observations? Being general counsel of NOAA was probably the best job I ever had. And my job was legal and policy, advising the head of NOAA and the Secretary of Commerce, as well as individual problems that came up, legal problems. The big difference I noticed between that position and being in private practice or my previous litigation positions is you can be proactive if you have a policy position. And I think the experience that everybody has talked about, learning litigation first, getting some grounding in lawyer skills helps with that. It gives you a bigger picture. Whereas much of what we do as lawyers working with clients is individual, small scale problem solving, even though it can affect broader groups. I represent trade associations, so it's a lot of people similarly situated. But in those cases, you're reactive. You're reacting to something that is coming at your clients. When you are in a policy position like general counsel of an agency, you can spot issues coming, and it's really your job to try and get ahead of them. And the people who are in these really big picture areas on the panel of climate change, that's what they're thinking about. How do we move these major policy issues that confront the whole country and the whole world forward? So it's a different mindset. And so I would say that's the primary difference I see between policy and what people might consider to be more lawyer legal type positions.
Switching gears a little bit here, I wanted to talk about change for a moment. Change is a constant in environmental law. Regulations and policies can change quickly as administrations change and new bills are passed in Congress. How have you dealt with that type of change? Do you have any advice for new professionals who might be nervous to begin a career in such a rapidly evolving field?
I think the answer is always be learning, always be trying to acquire new skills, and always be pushing yourself to be resourceful. I'll give you an example. When the COVID pandemic struck, everything shut down. There were no enforcement actions, regulatory efforts were stalled. Nothing was moving forward in environmental law. And so at the same time, a new whole regulatory scheme was created under a very quickly passed CARES Act. And one of those programs was called the PPP program. I don't even remember what it stands for. The idea was to throw a lot of money into small businesses to keep their people on the payroll protection program. And so this had nothing to do with environmental law, but it had everything to do with administrative law. Environmental laws are administrative laws. And as somebody else mentioned, most of the Administrative Procedure Act case law is about environmental laws. So it's the same ground rules. And so I became a PPP expert overnight, which was pretty interesting because it was definitely a plane that was already flying while it was being built. And so every 2 days, there was another frequently asked questions or interpretation of how these rules were supposed to work. So I am still doing PPP work because now all of those loans were given out. They were converted to grants, and people who were not smart enough to ask me in the first place how to comply are now at odds with the federal government under the False Claims Act and under a variety of other things. So it was an unexpected change that you could only deal with if you were crazy and thought, like so many people have said, I can do that, and went and did it. The same thing when administrations change. We touched on this. Most of the administrations that I've been under, both in government and out, have been pro-regulatory. the Trump administration is regulatory reform or whatever it's called. But if your whole practice has been representing companies who are trying to deal with regulations that they must comply with, suddenly there's this open invitation, come in and talk about regulations you don't like anymore and want the government to change. That's the current climate we're in. The problem with that is to revoke a regulation, you have to go through the same 18-month or so regulatory process that it takes in order to write a regulation. And clients think this is going to happen overnight. You know, they hear politicians speak and they think it's magic, right? Snap your fingers. But so the lesson in this for me is I just can never be comfortable. I've always got to be looking for what's coming and be ready to adapt.
I mean, I would just say, you know, being a lawyer, everything's always different. Every case is different. Laws are constantly changing, right? And in ways in which are, you know, not necessarily beneficial to regular folks like us or even to businesses. I just read an article yesterday about how many appliance manufacturers are upset that the current administration wants to roll back energy efficiency standards. You know, those big companies invested a lot of money to develop their products to meet those standards. And now they're going to have to compete against, say, an upstart company who never invested a dime in that and now can make things a lot cheaper, you know, and that doesn't benefit us. And it's not going to, you know, it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's not going to benefit the industry. And those kinds of changes are always happening. Bigger picture, environmental law, I think, is on the cusp of completely sort of shifting gears and changing. For the first, you know, 30 to 50 years, the focus was on very large businesses with big smokestacks or big pipes going into the river, right? And in some sense, you know, we developed a really good regulatory framework to deal with that. The Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, you know, have done an amazing job of cleaning our water and air, considering our population has doubled since they were passed. But now we're entering a phase of environmentalism that is just so diffuse that that old model is not going to fit very well. And we can see that through the Clean Power Plan that got struck down, trying to use a very old law in a very new way to address a new problem, right? So now we've got problems with stormwater runoff, right? That is the biggest driver of degrading water quality, certainly in this area in the Chesapeake Bay, but I would say probably nationwide, agriculture being another big one that has now come into environmental law, yet it's excluded from a lot of environmental laws. How are we going to grapple with that in the future, right? Climate change. We are all sources of carbon pollution, right? The cars we drive, the consumer choices we're making, that at the end of the day, we can try and regulate these larger industries. But if, you know, to really address climate change, it has to get down almost to the consumer level. And those laws are going to look so very different than the environmental laws we have now. So if you're interested in environmental law, you should be interested and embrace change and complexity. You know, complexity, students complain to me about, oh, this is so complicated. I say, you're welcome. And you should be excited about that because complexity equals employment. You know, if it wasn't difficult, they wouldn't need environmental lawyers, right? And so, you know, change is just built into this field and, you know, is something that you should embrace and something that you should be looking at getting ahead of, right? Getting out in front of, right? The attorneys who got in front of PFAS are now doing really, really interesting work and doing quite well for themselves, as an example. So, you know, I would just say get used to change because it's not going to stop.
I don't have a lot to add, and I think that my work, that there is always change, but at an international level, things move slower. Thinking about the Escazú Agreement and ratification, entry into force, that things are just different from an international standpoint versus doing domestic law. So that's something you might consider when thinking about what type of law you might choose. I'm not saying that things are constant in international law. That would be very, very wrong to say, but they just work differently. That,
Long time.
yeah, things move more slowly, but if you're working on a project, a domestic project in a different country than the US, then things will be changing quickly and you have to adapt and you have to be up to speed on what's happening in the ground, that you are generally and always should be working with experts in that country to understand the context and the given applicable laws. But again, if you're working at a purely international level, change is very different. That it happens, but it doesn't happen at the same pace as it would in a domestic project.
Yeah, I would just echo what folks have said, that environmental law by its very nature is very flexible, and you just have to be able to adapt to that as you go. I would also kind of echo my previous answer. You know, I don't think it's controversial to say the changes that we're seeing right now are unprecedented, and it's a very difficult time for a lot of folks, and finding a workplace and a community that will support you through those changes is also very important.
Hope they have muted here, it's fine. I'm sorry, your first name again.
Meredith.
Meredith, yeah. Meredith, if we could get those unmuted. Meredith, you know, the first person I got your remarks.
I think it's still.
Okay, great, thank you. It just pops up here, but good. I meant to address this up front, and obviously this is a time of huge change in the federal government, federal agencies, and federal service itself, the nature of federal service. And this is not the forum for commenting on that. I'm not going to, but I'm sure that's at the front of people's minds who are thinking about, who might feel drawn to public service and wondering what this means. And, you know, no, I don't know what the future holds more than anyone else. I will say one of the reasons I wanted to, and I paused before agreeing to be on the panel, because I thought, is this really the time to talk about a career in federal service? And I decided it was, at least it sort of coincided a little bit with the conclusion of my service at EPA, because I wanted to share what that was like and what it has been, and it always has the potential to be. And I'll just offer that folks came into my shop, you know, 4 or 5, whatever, 6 years out of law school, and they're coming in. Statement was, I've always wanted to work at EPA. That was my dream job. It just took me a while because it is hard to get in. So while it might not be the direction that the opportunities you might be looking for now, they can arise in the future. You don't know what the future holds. So if you have that spark, if you have that draw to public service, I think one of the reasons I decided to come here was to help you, you know, in a sense, keep that spark alive, you know, for when the opportunities can arise in the future.
Just want to add one thing. I have mainly been talking about regulation-driven change, and others have too. But there's another factor that has really emerged in, I'd say, the last 10 years, and that's market-driven change. So think about this model. Consumers talk to a big box company, giant company, and say, we only want PFAS-free products. We only want products that have a supply chain that's been checked out and is not using slave labor. And this is not just a national phenomenon, it's international. And the UK has fairly recently passed a law modeled on the California Modern Slavery, Anti-Slavery Act. And so a lot of these forces are in play, even apart from what our government is doing. And it's not just the federal government. There are states who are very active in regulating all kinds of ways, and companies have to comply with them. And if you're a company, are you going to make a special rule for the California Prop 65 and not do it elsewhere? What about the PFAS regulations, which across this country are a patchwork quilt of requirements? So those factors, in addition to the market forces I'm talking about, are also very much in play. And so we shouldn't overlook, and climate change is another example, different states packaging requirements in different states. So there are a whole lot more things going on here than just what may be happening at this moment in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, you should, I would say, think of yourself, you're interested in environmental law, you should be thinking of yourself as somewhat of an entrepreneur. As Jane just pointed out, that there are going to be a lot of changes in sort of society that are going to occur sort of outside the law or be consumer driven first and then embodied in the law. That combined with an increased interest in environmental justice, there's going to be an explosion in community lawyering, right? And trying to inform communities about the things they're consuming and or doing and how they're affecting the environment and their community, and trying to advocate for change both through the legal system, but outside the legal system as well. So it's hard to predict where that's going to go, but I just, you already are seeing it happening. There are more and more attorneys now focused on environmental justice, which is a fantastic and long overdue development. But I think Jane hit another growing, movement, and that is the consumer movement. How is that going to be driven? How can environmental lawyers drive that towards environmental goals? So it's a real exciting time, frankly, to sort of either get into environmental law, or if you're thinking about shifting gears in environmental law, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there because of all this change.
Speaking of community lawyering, I have to plug ELI has a series called Community Lawyering for Environmental Justice. You can find it on our website. We'll probably link to it in the chat, but the next installment is coming in July, so stay tuned there. I have a few more questions I want to ask, and then probably in about 20 minutes, we'll open it up for audience questions. So for folks online, go ahead and keep putting your questions in. I can see them coming in now. But we do have many students and young professionals attending today. I know there are some in the room, and I can see them chatting online. And so what is one thing that you wish you had known about the field when you were first starting to practice?
I guess just how much change. When I was in law school, I thought I would go someplace and work my whole career there, and nothing could be further from the truth. And it took me a while to get used to that sense of impermanence and not be daunted by it. But that's probably the single biggest surprise to me in my career.
Yeah, I think if I had to go back, I would definitely say looking at environmental law through solely the lens of litigation, I think I regret that a bit. I think part of the reason why I'm able to tell you folks like, hey, think about all this different stuff now, right, is because I didn't, and I regret it. So I would say, more thought up front about what you want to do and why and what really excites you and those sorts of things, I would say, would really be helpful to look at it more of a big picture, and then understanding that big picture, where do you fit in? I never really engaged with the great big picture of environmental law until I got into this position.
And I think, if I could go back, it's something that I did, but to be open to going a different path than maybe you thought you would end up. And, really being open to the possibilities that you're going to meet a lot of really amazing people in the environmental law sphere, to stay in touch with them, that I think that you will meet some very kind, passionate, incredibly intelligent people that are doing really interesting things. And I think keep in touch with them. People love hearing from people. Like I love getting an email from a former student. I love when our former interns or research associates email me, tell me what they're up to. I love keeping in touch with people I've met, from my travels from work, and just dropping them a line. And it seems like they like hearing from me too. So I would keep your connections and think of them as, both professional, but also personal, that you're not just meeting these people to advance your career or to advance a project, that you're meeting really wonderful people, and that you should take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think for me, I wish I had known
Sort of
how broad the work can be. Like I work in a very seemingly niche area, Clean Air Act, federal law. And yet I've done so many different aspects of that work. You know, I've worked at 2 academic think tanks in California with UCLA and with NYU. I've worked at state government. I've worked local government. I'm now at a nonprofit, and kind of, I don't think I really understood the full spectrum of how you could do clean air work. Is it, you know, doing policy work and blogs communicating to the public, which was more of the academic think tank role? Is it affirmatively litigating on behalf of the state of California? Or is it, you know, litigating on behalf of community members or our NRDC members? You know, I don't think I fully understood the spectrum. And you know, coming to NRDC, where I'm able to do a lot of different things and kind of dabble in everything at once, that's finally been the thing that I'm like, oh, this is great. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a full-time litigator. I didn't want to do full-time policy. Now I can do everything and do something different every day. And I don't think I really realized that was possible. I didn't even know what I was looking for until I found it.
I would say, I'm not sure it's quite wish I had known, but maybe it's advice on what some of us were talking about earlier, what I call the art of counseling, and others might just say the soft skills, and really accelerating your learning of those. So when you're in law school, take that ADR class, maybe get out of the law school and take some other kind of thing like that. I was an adjunct professor at Catholic Law School, and I taught a class, a clinical class on interviewing and negotiation that was really focused on listening skills and problem solving skills. So that maybe listening and problem solving skills are at the heart of any job, frankly, right? But you've heard it on the panel a couple of times today. And so, and if you're in practice, you know, find some mediation training or whatever, you know, is available. Really try to accelerate as much as you can your understanding of those soft skills, because they will help you not only kind of in your transactions, like with clients, but at work, right? With your managers, with your colleagues. They're just at the heart of it, really, frankly, any work, as well as home, probably, right? So yeah, we tend to focus in the legal profession on those hard skills more, but soft skills in the end are going to maybe have the biggest impact on your career.
I want to make sure we have time to talk about mentorship, because that comes up frequently, and I've seen it come up in the Q&A so far. So what role did mentorship play in your legal journey? How can law students and new lawyers find mentors? And also, is it better to find mentors within your firm or organization or outside place?
Mentors played a big role in my career, even if they didn't realize they were being mentors. My first job, I remember the more senior attorney advisor, I was an attorney advisor to a federal trade commissioner, said, "What is it with you and adjectives?" And everything I wrote had adjectives. And he said, "No, it's got to be cleaner. You've got to be direct. You got to not forget the adjectives and adverbs too." So he was, without having been a formal mentor, he was a coach. And over again, I just learned so much from people along the way who didn't realize they were mentoring me. A signal experience in my career was one time when I was a partner at a law firm, a wonderful law firm here, King and Spalding. And an associate came to me and said, "Will you be my mentor?" I was flabbergasted. I didn't even know you could do that. And I said, "Yeah, of course. What do I do?" And so I sort of learned by doing, what were the questions on her mind? And now law firms where I've been a partner have formal mentoring programs. And just this week, I spoke with a young partner, newly minted partner, and she had a bunch of questions. She was really good at figuring out how to become a partner, but now she's trying to transition to how do you be a partner? How do you build a practice? At every stage of your career, you're going to have questions like that. How do I move to the next steps? What are my options? And sometimes my advice to a partner or associate is, you may have to leave this firm. You may have to, it's probably contrary to what I'm supposed to say to you, but you may, in order to broaden your skill set, develop your skills, figure out where you want to go someplace else to get it. And so hopefully you can find a mentor who can, say things like that, or you can ask them those kinds of questions. And so I think it's really valuable in terms of inside or outside of your workplace. I think the answer is both, if you can. So that's what I would say.
I mean, mentorship is absolutely vital for being a lawyer, for a policy person, right? I mean, they're the people that are going to teach you the things that you didn't learn in school or in your last job. And I think Steve hit on a really good point that I mean, he hit the nail on the head by saying essentially being a lawyer, that's a people-focused job. It is soft skills and being able to engage with people face to face is enormously important, which includes reaching out to people. Alumni networks are a great place to start for mentors, right? We have a mentoring program within the University of Maryland Law School. But just listen to the stories that have been, Meredith talking about, hey, community lawyering, that was really important to me. That really and my experiences living in West Virginia, seeing the damage to people's lives, right? That is incredibly important. And, hearing about, working with people in Honduras and Guatemala to solve a problem, right? That is in a room with people hearing their stories, right? All of these things should drive you towards, wow, there's a lot of stuff I'm not quite learning yet, but I could learn by reaching out to people and starting to interact with them, right? And you can find mentors within your organization. You should try to find mentors outside your organization, right? Because some things you might not want to talk to your mentor within an organization about. Like, hey, I'm having problems within this organization. Is it me or is it them, right? That's probably not the best question to ask within an organization. You want to go outside. Professors, I mentor a lot of students, a lot of our alumni I still engage with and have, gone through some very difficult times as federal lawyers, environmental lawyers, and walking them through, well, what are your options? What, getting them to just be a sounding board to their ideas and walking them through some of the if-then statements, right, that follow. So I can't stress enough the value of mentors, from everything of where do I fit in here to now that I figured that out, how do I become that lawyer, to, okay, now that I'm that lawyer, right, how can I be a better lawyer, right? Everything along that line, it's always going to be mentors with more experience, really. And the nice thing about the practice of law is there are no shortage of mentors, right? That folks, because they've experienced it, I had several incredible mentors. Judges are great mentors, right? Want to give back. It's just that simple. So you should never feel, at all, scared to try to engage somebody and have them become a de facto mentorship. Although I love that story of, I want you to be my mentor. That is as direct as it gets, and that's great. And the answer is going to be yes. So I would just encourage you folks to talk to people and, ask a lot of questions.
I would echo what has been said, that I've had some really great mentors in my career. That my first job out of law school, someone started around the same time as me. She was a more senior attorney, obviously, and she's like, all right, we're going to meet, I think, once a week, once every 2 weeks. I'm going to give you homework that's not part of your work, but you're going to look up these international and regional instruments related to gender law. And we're going to talk about them, and we're going to talk about how they apply to our work. Like, excellent. I like this. And I mean, she really took me under the wing. She took, just pushed me beyond what, I thought maybe I could accomplish, that she kind of expanded my mind to, okay, we're doing this, but how about we think about it like this? Or what if we do it like this? And I still chat with her. We still have, WhatsApp video calls, that we do not live in the same time zone or in the same country. But if we happen to be in the same place that we meet up. And it really, really helped change the trajectory of my career. I'm very thankful for her. And at the same time, I've had mentors at ELI. What do you want to do, Christine? You're working on this, but what do you really want to work on? Okay, let's develop it. Let's get it started. And I'm gonna push you, and we're gonna get this. Or, oh, you want to teach? Okay, I'm gonna, link you up with someone I know. We'll get you teaching too. That mentors are great. And I think people love, lawyers particularly love to give advice. They love to talk about their careers. And so if you ask somebody, they're going to be excited. Like the other day, I got a text from my mom about an incoming law student in DC. I'm like, where did you meet them? Oh, walking the dog. But would you text with her, give her some ideas about DC? And I'm like, absolutely. So people are excited to talk to you. People want to share what they've learned, and they want to help you. That I think sometimes the legal profession is categorized as maybe not the nicest, but I think that there are some very good, very kind people that really will help you. So find them and hold on to them.
Yeah, I would just add that as an awkward introvert myself, the idea of networking has always terrified me. And I think especially in law school, you're kind of forced into these, like, go to this networking event, talk to 10 people. You don't have to do it like that. I feel like I have developed my relationships both with mentors and mentees through just, one-on-one conversations and, working with someone at an internship over the whole summer. And so don't be scared if you don't have a huge Rolodex. It might just be 5 or 10 people that you've worked with throughout your career who you still maintain that really close relationship with. And that can be just as valuable and just as helpful as knowing 500 people. So for the introverts in the room, you can do it too, but you don't have to do it the way the extroverts do it.
Yeah, it's very individual thing, right? Mentorship can take lots of forms. I do think that two things that have been made already is points that have been made already is, in the best case, you kind of, if you can, pick your mentor. You watch them, you admire them, you think they have something to offer you. And if it feels uncomfortable, try to remember what's been said, that most people are happy to do it. And if they seem really busy, and they are really busy, then, see what their availability is. I want to put a pitch in for another kind of support tool, which is different than mentoring. It's coaching. I'm a federally trained coach, and I still coach EPA employees as an alumni. And I'm thinking about a practice. And for now, I'm giving some pro bono coaching to folks who've been separated from federal service. So if you're out there, feel free to reach out. Coaching is completely different from mentoring. The first conversation in a coaching session is, this is not mentoring. I'm not here to give advice. What coaching does is almost all questions, open-ended questions, to get you to untangle what's in your head and explore the challenges and obstacles you see and the opportunities you want to take advantage of, but not sure how to do it. So that's another thing. Lots of organizations, some have coaching programs. It's really worth exploring. That can be extremely helpful.
One last question, and then we will jump into audience questions. So I want to touch on networking versus mentorship. So what networking advice do you have for our audience, especially in our current legal world as things evolve and technologies change? Is there any advice you'd like to give them?
I would say it's invaluable. And I think it's already been said, keep in touch with people. Washington is a small town when it comes down to it, and people have long memories. So always be nice. Always be thinking about other people and help them out if you can. Networking events are like that awkward high school dance, with the boys on one side and the girls on the other. So those feel very forced. My experience of networking is the valuable networking has really come through a succession of jobs, contacts, connections, and even law school, alumni groups, in so many forms. So I've found out about job opportunities that way. I have hired people that way. I've gotten references for people I wanted to hire, and just clients too. You know, it's all about trust. I think that was a big point that some people on the panel have made, building trust with people and finding things in common. And that's kind of how it works in actual practice.
Yeah, I will be honest, I hate the term networking. Because networking, you envision sort of, you know, I think as Jane and Meredith point out, this notion of you have to get out and shake lots of hands and, you know, glad hand people and let them get to know you and be this kind of go-getter, right? I think most of that's kind of useless, frankly. That's socializing is what I call it, right? I think real networking is shared work experience, right? And that means that your network are the people that you work with. And it might just be one project, right? It might be a part-time job. It might be an externship or an internship, but that is networking, right? Working together and having those folks see you, who you are as a person, who you are as a professional, right? And you see them and hopefully you get along. And if you get along, right, and you respect each other, you've now networked. You have somebody in your network who will go to bat for you, you know, when you go looking for a job, for example, right? So think of it more as how can I develop shared work experiences with the kinds of people who could potentially mentor and or assist me in the career path that I've chosen, right? To me, that's networking. So I kind of redefine the term in a way I think that is helpful as opposed to, you know, anxiety producing, which would you agree with that, Meredith?
Yeah,
That's
actually what I was gonna say is kind of expand what your or narrow, I guess, what your definition of networking is. I feel like, again, in law school, you're sort of told that networking is exchanging business cards and meeting people you don't know. But my best version of networking has always been strengthening the relationships that I already have working, you know, folks that I, you know, mentored in law school who then, you know, worked somewhere that I needed to make a connection and I had that network. So it's like the network is actually the people you already know, not the people you're trying to meet that have been the most meaningful to me.
I would absolutely agree with that. And also share your work. Use LinkedIn, use social media, tell people what you're doing. You know how fast things can travel online. People are going to see it. People might reach out to you, be like, hey, I saw you post about your new project. Really interesting. Can we chat? And then you end up meeting someone interesting. And maybe they don't fit into your project right now, but down the road, I might want to work in that country. I think it might fit into my overall plan. Great. I know who you are now. I might come back to you in 2 years, but I know who you are. Or, you know, hey, I'm doing this project. I've been meeting with a ton of people. Again, they don't necessarily fit into the day-to-day work, but they can help amplify the message. I can help amplify their message. And it's more organic that it's, you know, a colleague will introduce me to someone who will introduce me to someone who will share what I'm doing. And then I have 5 new contacts. And it's not me going and standing in a room being really uncomfortable. Because generally, you know, if I go to an environmental law networking event that's not for international environmental law, I'm generally not who people want to talk to. I'm not going to help them the way that maybe, you know, a pure networking event might work. But if it happens more organically, I think it's great. That's also not to knock, like if that is your personality and you love being in a room with 50 new people, go for it. That can be a good exercise too. It's not for me, but I'm not gonna knock it.
I want to keep mine short, less than a minute, because I know we want to get to the questions, but there's a lot of great synergy in this panel, as you've seen. And I just want to point out on Bill will be happy to know that Merriam-Webster, at its first synonym for networking is the word socializing. So you hit it on the head. And the only thing I'll say is, you know, think about it similarly to your friends. And part of it, I think it's to mention, is like keeping in touch with people, right? And how easy it is to like lose touch with friends when you're kind of going and maybe you call when you're going to be in town or whatever. I had lunch yesterday with the general counsel from the Bush administration I worked for, and it was fabulous, you know, and she gave me 4 names, 5 names to talk to next. And so that really is the way, and try to keep in touch. It's not necessarily easy, but you already have it, to be honest. I mean, I think it's what you're hearing here. And what's not that hard to do is expand the network with the network you have. Hey, a couple people I could talk to.
And we'll just add one thing. If you do find yourself in the circumstance of a whole room full of people with name tags and you have to, what do I do? How do I engage with people? It's so simple. We have a wine tasting event where we have alumni and students. We bring them together. It's purely social. Let's have some fun. And the students, I'll be like, yeah, I gotta go talk to some alumni. Come on, they like you already. Trust me. And so what do I say? It's so simple. There is one phrase that will work every time with attorneys. What do you do? That's all you have to ask. And you will sit back for the next 5 to 10 minutes and hear a rambling story about what a great law practice that person has. And it'll be enlightening and interesting. And then you say, oh, thanks so much. That's so interesting. Maybe you have follow-up questions. Maybe you say, okay, hey, I'm going to go, I have to go talk to someone else. I want to find someone who does this, right? And off you go. It's so simple. What do you do? 3 words. Yeah, I mean, one's used twice, but there's still just 3 distinct words. It's so simple.
Well, I agree. I mean, my favorite approach to this is always ask questions. Stop talking about yourself, ask questions because other people are really interesting. So that's my advice on that.
Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. There are lots of questions coming in online. I do not think we'll be able to get through all of them, but I'm going to ask a few and then go to the room as well. So one question is, what is a skill that folks should focus on when transitioning into environmental law?
Well, I'll just throw out one quick answer. I, unlike Meredith, do not have a science or engineering or technical background. And I said this to some of the panel members beforehand. I've always thought, if I can get someone who does know those things to have me understand it, so I can then turn that into an advocacy position to a regulator or a judge or whoever, that's really the role I play. So it's fabulous if you do have that kind of background, but if you don't, rather than trying to think you need to learn every advanced scientific or technical skill, just figure out how to ask questions and try to understand and break down to layman's type level what some expert is telling you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, mine is very similar. Just get comfortable reading a scientific article. It's just kind of that simple. There's some, great handbooks out there on basic scientific principles. The federal manual on scientific evidence for judges is fantastic to sort of both get the law as to expert testimony and understanding some basic scientific principles.
Yeah, I think communication and translation, being able to present your message persuasively to different audiences and being able to adapt. If I'm talking to a judge, if I'm talking to an environmental justice community group, if I'm talking to another NGO, if I'm talking to a science colleague, an econ colleague, just being able to adapt your message so that you can communicate effectively to different audiences, I think is probably listening,
and that's kind of, you have to listen to be able to do that, right? And let's leave it at that.
Another question our online audience asked was, what opportunities exist for working in environmental law without a law degree? Does anyone have any thoughts?
Consulting groups and the array of expertise, areas of expertise you need to be functioning in environmental law is enormous. Scientific, engineering, economic, a whole array. Consulting groups, teaching, writing. The environmental trade press is a really interesting type of job. I read those publications every day to keep on top of things. Those are some things I would throw out.
Yeah, I would just say it depends on what your background is, because whatever your background is, economics, science, engineering, communications, there's a role for you, but it's going to vary a lot, depending on what other thing you bring to the table.
Absolutely agree. I'd also throw out community organizing. Working on the ground with community groups is an important skill that doesn't necessarily need to have that legal background. That some lawyers might do that part, but there's also a need for community organizers as well. Here at the Environmental Law Institute, we work a lot with scientists, that we have scientists on staff. So yep, it really just depends on your background.
I'll pose one more question from the online audience and then we'll get some from in the room. Folks were asking, what does your day-to-day look like at your job?
I never know. When I walk in the door, what it's going to be. I'll have a plan. Right now, I'm revising a sort of defense strategy document on what's our blueprint for how we're going to approach a particular issue. But I've already had, 3 calls about something else and switched over to a tariff discussion. So it's so unpredictable. I can't really say more than that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as a litigator, my day was just very different all the time. I'd say the one thing that I think coming into being a lawyer, I think a lot of law students assume most of your day is spent wrestling with the law. And it's not. That's the fun part, right? When you get to write a brief or do a legal analysis, write a memo and so forth, do all that research. I'd say 3/4 of my job as a lawyer was focused on factual development, was focused on developing experts, developing lines of cross-examination for my opponent's experts, talking to witnesses, doing scientific research, plowing through lots of documents. Like that's sort of the day-to-day of a litigator. Now, my job varies so much. I travel a lot, attending conferences, giving presentations, teaching class, running an externship program, meeting with folks outside the law school, hoping to get, my students positions there, talking to Maryland's, and local government and trying to convince them to do the things differently. It really, and sometimes, it's nice Friday afternoons. I always block all that time off just to read. It's all I do on Friday afternoons because by then I'm tired anyway. So I don't, I'm done talking to students. Just leave me. They're not around anyway. They don't want to be around on a Friday afternoon. So, so I think, the answer is going to be wildly different for almost every attorney is what I would say.
I can give you an example of what I might do in a week, because again, every day is different. That I spend some of my time supervising more junior staff. A lot of my time right now is on my environmental defenders platform, building an online database with in-country partners, looking at prosecutions and investigations of lethal attacks of environmental defenders in Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico. So working with our in-country partners, working with external groups that are also thinking about these issues. When it gets a little more advanced, it will be traveling to these countries, holding, consultation, stakeholder engagement, launching the platform, writing reports, engaging with groups that are thinking about the same things that I'm thinking about, that want to collaborate on things. A lot of times it's meetings, it's grant writing, it's figuring out where's my next funding coming from for the project. That it varies greatly. It's who's going to cater the consultation that we're holding? Where can we rent a room? Which university will host us? That there's a good deal of admin in my job. There's, the law, and then there's maybe the less glamorous, okay, I'm booking flights for 5 people. I don't want this judge from Sweden to be traveling 24 hours. How do I find something I can afford, but something that he can sit through? So it's all over the board.
Yeah, echoing meetings, so many meetings. I think I'm not sure if this question, but one of the questions was about how things have changed from late to early career. And I look back on early career very jealously because I'm like, oh, I used to just be able to write memos and do the legal research. So for folks early in your career, enjoy that. I feel like a lot of what I do now is, as I've, moved up into a more management position, is sort of coordinating and talking to colleagues at other organizations, to working with our scientists. And I kind of actually miss just doing legal work.
As a manager, it was mostly meetings all day. But they were collaborative problem solving meetings, whether with my staff or with clients. So I enjoyed it a lot. I love meetings. I'm an extrovert. But as a staff attorney, the challenge is getting in what we call deep work. And before I left, and they're still continuing to work on how do you create space for deep work amidst email and meetings. And it's a challenge. But I have one book recommendation, because this is what I was talking about. It's called Time Warrior by a guy named Stephen Chandler. And he calls nonlinear time management. Very interesting, off the beaten path in terms of thinking about. He doesn't even use the word time management, but.
Do we have any questions in the room? Yes, let's go on the left first.
Good afternoon, my name is Elizabeth Gibson. I just want to first thank BLI and all the panelists. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I want to build off of something that I believe you spoke about, well, and Kristen as well, which is that going from policy to litigation is quite difficult. So I'm coming in as a new attorney, but also career changer for the whole decade-long career. So are there certain unique considerations or pathways that you've seen work about breaking into the field as an attorney? That's right.
Sorry, just to clarify, you mean specifically into litigation or just into the field?
Well, no, not litigation, just as a new lawyer who has a prior career. So, having to market yourself where, I can do this.
I'll repeat the question really quickly for the folks online. So the question was, do you have any recommendations for breaking into the field?
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I work on all the time with students, right? So one is your alumni network, right? That alumni and our alumni network is wonderful. It's why I'm in the position I'm in now. And in 15 years, never once have I reached out to an alum and said, hey, I have a student or another alum who wants to talk to you. Never once did I get the answer no. It's always yes. So start, with the sort of folks who know and who have somewhat of an invested interest in you, right? Career development office from your law school, right? Another great place. Volunteer. Is there an organization that you really respect and admire? Go work for them, a little bit, not talking a huge amount. Become a member, get involved, talk to their attorney in that organization. Get ideas, who knows? It may be that they're looking for an attorney and you've already showed I'm interested in what you do, right? So I think all of those would be sort of good places to start sort of building a network. ELI, by the way, hosts an amazing jobs bulletin board. So that's another place, if you're not an ELI member and you're looking to break into the field, think about becoming an ELI member, honestly.
And I believe it's free or very inexpensive for students, right?
Right.
Yes, it's free for students. So all the students watch should
It's
definitely
very helpful.
tune in. And I had a
And low cost for young professionals, I think.
absolutely. Yeah, we'll link it in the chat, but we highly recommend ELI membership if you enjoy this program or if you want networking opportunities, educational opportunities, all sorts of things. A weekly newsletter. Check ELI out.
Was that your question or were you talking more?
Well, I guess I could add on, so maybe a unique, pathways is really how I framed the question, because I think those are all great suggestions, and certainly, I, received that. So I'm just wondering if there were unique pathways that you've seen work in your experience, whether with your colleagues or in your own experience.
I would say don't be afraid to take jobs outside of environmental law, just because so many legal skills are transferable, like learning how to write. That's going to help you at any job. Getting experience working on briefs, working, at whatever level, if you want to litigate, get appellate experience or things like that. A lot of, I think, particularly at nonprofits, it's very common that mid-career folks come in, they went to a private firm to pay off their student loans and then come to a nonprofit. And they may not have done any environmental law, but they knew that's what they wanted to do eventually. but they have those skills that are transferable. And so I would say, don't be afraid to just get those skills wherever you can, even if it isn't environmental law isn't your first step, maybe it's your second step. But sometimes you just have to get that first step. I know when I was starting out, it felt like no one was ever hiring entry level, and it was like, how am I supposed to get the 2 or 3 years experience? And sometimes it might not be in the field you want, but at least it's the skills that you're developing.
I think we have time for one more question, but then hopefully folks will stick around if you want to ask after too. Yes.
Thank you so much for fellow at the American Cancer Society, specifically working with the Cancer Action Network on cancer in the environment, or issues of public policy issues and seasonally linked to cancer in the environment. But before that, when I was in law school, I was a law clerk at the working in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, dealing with people. As some of you guys may know, and some people in the audience may know, they have completely phased out their environmental justice office. So I was wondering, as a young policy professional, as agencies are at the end of administration changes, how does into private practice from going from the government or public policy or even federal contracting as a concern?
Well, as the private sector law firm person, just submit resumes, look for job openings. I never can predict when we'll have an opening or not, but what I look for is a writing sample, a law school transcript, and a story. Why do you want to do this? Why would this be a good fit for you and for us? That would be kind of the orientation I would expect in, the cover letter, and then make your resume, have multiple versions of your resume. If you're applying for a job at a law firm as an associate and the job opening says, we've got this huge Clean Air Act problem, certainly emphasize that. But, if you're trying to apply for a different kind of job, reorder it, those would be the suggestions I would have.
Do you want to continue doing environmental justice work?
So that's what I'm thinking about now. What I do at the American Cancer Society involves cancer, environment, and carcinogens generally. So of course that intersects with each of the non-elements. Actually want to certain communities. So I'm actually not sure if I'm going to continue doing environmental justice work.
Well, what I was going to point out is, frankly, environmental justice is really more of a local state matter than it is a national matter anyway. And that there's a lot going on at the local and state level, in DC, in Maryland, and in many states, New Jersey, Virginia. So there's a lot of work being done, and it's more community driven, community focused, right? And looking at matters, things like increased incidence of cancer around this coal-fired power plant, and what's going to be done about it? How can we address this, tighten up the pollution limits, so forth and so on. So if you're interested in that work, I think there's a lot of opportunity still out there. The EPA has recently really ramped up their efforts, but it's more or less on the giving out of grants to address a lot of these issues, not in the how are we going to use the law to change this, right? That is going on at the local and state level. So you might just want to shift your focus, but if that's not what you want to do and you want to sort of move into something different, and I think this gets to your question as well, what is it that, in your history to date, right, that you can build off of? If you're looking to change direction in your career, you've got to look backwards and say, okay, what could I use as some building blocks based on my past experience and so forth to start this new career and start it in that direction. So
We're almost at the end of our time, but want to open the floor if any of you have just in about a minute in closing remarks you'd like to share with attendees.
Nothing really generally to add.
the law is a very creative profession to get into. And, at the end of the day, creativity, what are you as a lawyer? You're a storyteller and you're a translator. So if you look at it from those perspectives, right, big picture wise, I think there's a lot of room to do sort of whatever it is you want to do. I think you just have to be patient and persistent in getting to where you want to be in this great big sprawling environmental law field, even under trying circumstances like today.
I would say just be true to yourself. You're interested in this for a reason. And at the end of the day, you have to live with your choices. So make sure that they feel good to you and true to you. And I think that's going to set you up for success, no matter what you do in this field.
I would say, give yourself a break. I felt like both of my parents had worked at the same place their whole career. And I had this idea that my first job was going to be my dream job and I was going to be there forever. And I put so much pressure on finding that first job. And that's just not necessarily the case anymore for a lot of us recently graduating. And I think just taking the pressure off. At the end of the day, capitalism is what it is, and we got to find a job. And sometimes that job is not your dream job, but you'll get there eventually. And if you leave in a year, if you leave in 2 years, no one's going to judge you for it. It's not that big a deal. We all got where we wanted to be eventually. And just take the pressure off yourselves. It's a tough time for many reasons. And
I'm going to offer something very briefly that one of my coaches told me. He calls it the 87% rule. And when we agonize over our decisions, we put a lot of, imagine your college choice, right? All that went into that. Is it A or B? A or B? I'm talking to my family. I'm talking to my friends. I don't know what to do. And then you choose college A. The 87% rule says 7% of how well or how it ends up is what you do after the decision. And that's sort of obvious when you're dealing with college, right? It's not the college you go to as much as how you apply yourself when you're in college. So I think that helps take the pressure off the decision-making, difficulty. I think it's really helpful.
Well, I want to give an absolutely huge thank you to our speakers for joining us today. We so appreciate you all sharing your advice and expertise with folks. A few quick logistics before we end. So as I said at the beginning, this is the first of 8 sessions of summer school that we have scheduled. So next week will be virtual only via Zoom, covering NEPA and the Endangered Species Act. So be sure to tune into that. And then 2 weeks from today, we will be back in the ELI office and online for the Clean Air Act, and many more sessions after that. So be sure to check them out online. And this program and so many more are made possible by the support of our members. So please do check out ELI membership. And members can get all of our programs, can get access to all of the recordings, which is also a great benefit. So keep in touch with ELI if this is your first time here. And just thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our speakers, and hopefully the in-person folks can stick around and ask questions too. Thank you.